Out front tonight, 13 men. 13 men are deciding the future of American health care tonight. They are the Republican senators who will take the House bill passed yesterday and craft a Senate version that could become Trump care. That version could be the law of the land. And there is not one woman at the table to represent more than half the population of this country. Let me show you the picture of the 13. Here they are. These are the men who will take on the health care bill. Lots of questions here, including this. Why couldn't they find one woman to represent the concerns of 126 million female adults in the United States of America? What can they realistically bring to the table when the conversation turns to, let's just say, childbirth, maternity leave, ovarian cancer, or breast cancer? And what is their response tonight to excluding even one woman? Well, I want to read exactly what one of their aides told our Dana Bash, and I want to read it in full. They said, "We have no interest in playing the games of identity politics. That's not what this is about. It's about getting a job done. We'll work with any member of any background who wants to pass a health reform bill that will reduce premiums and take away the burdens that Obamacare inflicted. To reduce this to gender, race, or geography misses the more important point of the diverse segments of the conference the group represents on policies, from members who support Medicaid expansion to those opposed to those who have called for long-term full repeal." Well, apparently that's what good governing is these days, according to those 13 white men. We begin with Phil Mattingly out front tonight on Capitol Hill. And Phil, it does seem like a pretty glaring omission, right? I mean, we're talking about 51% of the country not included, and there are big medical differences between men and women. Are Republicans really going to cut the women in their party out of the process?
Yeah, it was hard not to miss. And most importantly, I think, because there are 5 female members of the Republican conference in the Senate who are very high profile, very well thought of, and are expected to play a very big role in this process. I think what it does underscore, Aaron, is that they're at the early stages of this, and there are going to be a lot of people involved. But what was most interesting, at least over the course of the last 48 hours, as they started to figure all this out, was just their reception to the House bill at all. Take a listen to how Republican senators responded to the passage.
Well, the Senate will write its own bill. I mean, that's the way it works, right?
We will work together carefully to write our own bill. We will make sure we know what our bill costs when we vote on it.
Yeah. So what you heard from Lamar Alexander, who's the chairman of the Health Committee over in the Senate, is basically a little bit of a not so subtle shot at the House for moving their bill without knowing what it cost, and making very clear they're going to move in their own direction. Now, this group of 13 that you pointed out is starting at least from a diverse perspective, from an ideological perspective. And the issues that they will be tackling right now are central to the House bill, and changes are very much expected, whether it's the Medicaid expansion, whether it's the shape of the tax credit, whether it's the Obamacare regulations that became such a hot issue in the House. But also another issue that I think is really important based on kind of how you led in, Aaron, Planned Parenthood defunding. That is in the House bill. There are a lot of Republicans that are very much for that. 2 of the women in the Senate, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, have made very clear they do not support that. Aaron, Republicans can only lose 2 of their own members and still pass this bill with a majority over in the Senate. So you talk about who's going to be involved, how they're going to be involved, and how their perspectives are represented here. They don't have a choice. Everybody in this conference is going to have to play a part of this process. But to your point, it's better to be in the room early than outside of it and consulted later.
Right. And you would think they could have brought Murkowski Collins right into those pictures, if at all, to at least nod to this glaring omission. Thank you so much, Phil. So obviously, the big question here on this bill is, what does it mean for millions of Americans who have pre-existing conditions? Dr. Sanjay Gupta is out front with this special report.
33-year-old Valerie Daniel does all the typical things a mom of 2 does. Also typical, Valerie suffers from a chronic illness. In her case, it's Crohn's disease, an inflammation of her GI tract. No doubt, if the bill that recently passed the House ever becomes law, there will be winners and losers. The winners, the young, healthy, and wealthy. On the losing side, could be the millions of Americans with chronic conditions, like Valerie. Every few weeks, Valerie makes a 40-minute drive from her home in Noonan, Georgia, to the hospital for an infusion treatment. She invited me along on one of her trips.
This type of medicine is a lifetime commitment.
You couldn't not take the treatment?
I had no option. I mean, at this point, I had tried every drug, surgeries, procedures. this was my option. My symptoms, are...
Without insurance, a year's dosage could cost Valerie about $20,000.
Are you worried about the Affordable Care Act being repealed and the impact it would have?
I'm nervous, not knowing the future, not knowing exactly what's going to be voted on. What are they going to keep? What are they going to do for people like me who have chronic illnesses?
Under the House bill, now at the Senate, insurance companies could possibly put limits on coverage of certain treatments, depending on the state. States may no longer require insurers to cover essential health benefits, like emergency and preventative care. And people with a chronic or pre-existing condition, like asthma, diabetes, or Crohn's disease like Valerie has, could potentially have to pay more.
Okay, Valerie, how did you do after your last infusion?
Now, if Valerie does maintain her health insurance without any gaps longer than 63 days, the proposed law should protect her from any sudden jumps in her premiums due to her underlying illness. Problem is, that can be hard to do. On average, 30 million people have gaps in their insurance coverage because they are out of work, too sick to work, or can no longer afford it.
My husband lost his job a few years ago, so there was about a 3-month period where he was not employed, and we were told that we had no choice.
When you look at our health insurance industry overall now, as a consumer, someone who again uses it, what grade would you give our health insurance system?
I would probably say about a C.
C.
Maybe a B minus.
One of the things that comes up, Aaron, obviously, when you hear from someone like Valerie, is obviously people with chronic illness, they utilize the healthcare system more. In fact, listen to this, Aaron. About 1% of people in this country account for 21% of healthcare costs. 5% of people account for 50% of healthcare costs, and 20% of people account for 80% of healthcare costs. The cost issue is something that's really not addressed in either one of these plans, and probably is something that has to be addressed to fix our healthcare system once and for all.
Right. Ultimately, as you lay those numbers out, which I think is so crucial and stunning for everyone to hear, I mean, ultimately that's the issue. If you don't address the cost, nothing's going to work. Premiums are going to stay going up. Deductibles are going to go up because costs are going up. I mean, all right, Sanjay, if you could stay with me, I'd really appreciate it. I want to bring Mark Preston in as well, and Phil Mattingly also coming back. So, Mark, when you see Sanjay's reporting and you take Valerie's story, there are millions like her with chronic illness across this country. You hear Sanjay's statistics, right, on how 20% of people account for 80% of the costs in this country. Are lawmakers going to ever be honestly saying that these people like Valerie, will not lose coverage?
Listen, I think that no. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, honestly, I think that they may believe it. They may say it enough times that they think that, in fact, that it is a fact. But the bottom line is that there are people that are going to be hurt. And I think we'll know in a week or so what the CBO says. We saw the last CBO score. We saw 24 million people were going to lose insurance. We'll see what happens when the Congressional Budget Office actually scores this bill, reviews it, and then these members of Congress, these House members who are back home, perhaps they'll start getting an earful from their constituents. I mean, the bottom line is that when you put a face to it like Sanjay just did, that's a lot more powerful than putting a statistic to it. It
absolutely is. But Sanjay, on that statistic front, can you just say it was 1% of people account for how much of the cost? 20%?
21% of healthcare costs. That's right. 5%, 50%.
So, Phil Mattingly, is that part of the calculation here for some of the members in the Senate when they look at this, that they're hoping that the statistic is more powerful than the individual story? Because obviously 1% accounting for 21% of the costs, that's a small group of people. And from a purely voting political perspective, that might be something they could overcome.
Yeah, look, that's really the rationale of what you saw come through in the House. It is kind of the divergent, almost ideological views on how to handle health care. That's not Democrat or Republican. It split the Republican Party as well. We saw it crystal clear over the course of the last couple of weeks. The idea of if you want to get premiums down, some of the things that you would need to provide to try and help people that drive costs up for the entire system might have to go away. That's exactly the core of the debate, the internal debate we saw in the Republican Party over the course of the last 3 weeks. I think the big issue right now is, and you could see it in Sanjay's piece, and you can hear it from people who are dealing with constituents, the phone calls that are coming into their offices right now. This is real. This is real life for a lot of these people. And so when you have the effort to try and address maybe the majority of your constituents who don't have to deal with this issue and are concerned about premiums going up, while you still have to deal with these personal stories stories and people who call into your office and are legitimately scared. It is a very, very difficult position for lawmakers to be in, and one that senators, as they kind of consider rewriting large portions of this, are going to have to grapple with every day.
Tammy Luby joins us as well from CNN Money as we talk about this. So the bill, look, we all know it's going to change in the Senate. And as you all know, as Phil's reporting, I mean, there's the calculus that Republicans are playing with right now. But I'm wondering how much it's going to change in the Senate, because President Trump talked about health care last night in that meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia. And he said something that everyone on this panel will probably find pretty shocking. Let me play it for you.
We have a failing health care. I shouldn't say this to our great gentleman and my friend from Australia, because you have better health care than we do. We're going to have great health care very soon. Obamacare is failing.
Okay, the reason that's stunning, for anyone who tracks Australia, they have a universal health care system, okay, which is something that Republicans and the president say is an anathema to them. This was not lost on Senator Bernie Sanders. He seized the moment and responded with this.
Let's take a look at the Australian healthcare system. Let us move to a Medicare for all system that does what every other major country on earth does, guarantee healthcare to all people at a fraction of the cost per capita that we spend. Thank you, Mr. President. We'll quote you on the floor of the Senate.
Mark, did the president realize that he just endorsed universal health care with that comment to Prime Minister Turnbull?
God, I don't even know what to say. I mean, listen, it's clearly that the president doesn't understand the healthcare system as it is right now. He doesn't understand necessarily what the bill is, and he certainly doesn't understand how Australia executes its healthcare system. You know, it's comments like this that really do make it more difficult for Republicans as they're selling the plan. And quite frankly, it makes it more difficult for people to buy into the idea that they actually have the right proposal to overhaul healthcare as we know it right now. Because, look, we do understand there are problems with Obamacare that need to be fixed. But when President Trump does that, Aaron, he does himself no good.
Right. And Tammy, but I think what Mark mentioned is a crucial point here. The reality of it is Obamacare was not working for a lot of people, even the people it was supposed to help. There were some who were helped dramatically, but many others had health care, but the premiums were surging so much that they simply couldn't afford them, even under Obamacare, right? So the reality of it is the system in this country is broken at this time, right?
There are problems with it. I wouldn't say it's completely broken. Some of the problems were also the Republicans making. Obamacare had a lot of risk protections in the back of it to help lower premiums and help insurers get through this. But the Republicans actually blocked some of the funding for this, so insurers end up having to increase premiums a lot because they weren't getting the risk protections on the back end to help cover these high-cost patients.
Sanjay, I want to ask you the other thing that we pointed out here at the top of the show, which seems really important, not from a political point of view, but actually from a healthcare point of view, right? The healthcare working group in the Senate, right? The Republicans that are going to get together to put this together. They're saying they represent their constituents. It doesn't matter what race they are or where they're from or what gender they are. The reality of it is they are all men. It is 13 men. And it is not diverse at all in pretty much any respect, but certainly not in terms of gender. You know, what do you think about that, just from your perspective as a medical doctor, given that women, of course, have medical needs and medical risks that men simply do not have?
Yeah, I mean, look, on one hand, you know, there are certainly male medical doctors and people in the medical profession who take care of women's issues, breast cancer, cervical cancer, some of the things that you mentioned. On the other hand, you know, you're talking about a very, hopefully a comprehensive bill, and the idea that you wouldn't have some other you know, you wouldn't have women on this panel offering their points of view, I think is probably just being really short-sighted. I don't want to say that there's not men who could address some of those issues you mentioned, but I think it just seems like an oversight.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all of you taking the time tonight.
Support for Out Front comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully, so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/outfront. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states. NMLS ConsumerAccess.org number 3030.
Breaking news moments ago, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly arrived in Mexico City. They're going to be meeting with the Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto to discuss immigration and border security, i.e. the wall. Also on the border today, the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, meeting with Border Patrol agents and mayors in a Texas border town. All of this as many immigrants are afraid as to what is going to happen, whether they will be deported under President Trump. Nick Valencia is out front.
Jonathan Ramirez is an undocumented immigrant. At 7 years old, he swam across the Rio Grande with his parents to come to the United States. Now 22, he works at a produce store and lives in Atlanta with his wife and daughter, both born here.
I think she's going to be a ballerina.
But ever since Donald Trump became president, he's living in fear, worried his family won't be together for much longer.
It feels kind of uncertain because of the situation. I don't know if I may come home tonight or I might not come home tomorrow.
For Ramirez, even leaving his house is a big deal. He says people in the Latino community are worried about what they've seen in recent weeks. Raids and hundreds of arrests by immigration agents. They say these so-called collateral arrests are a new development under President Trump.
You already know people who've been deported.
Right, exactly. So that's how real the situation is. And, I come to think, maybe right now it's them, but tomorrow it might be me. My daily fear is that when Obama was in place, I didn't have to worry about as much as going to work. I didn't have to worry about walking the streets. I didn't have to worry about driving, and getting a simple ticket. Now with Trump being in place, I have to worry because I got him pulled over twice for driving with no license. And they told me at the courts, if we pull you over again, we're going to transfer you over to immigration. So, it can't get no more real than that.
I think the reality is we may be looking into an era of expanded enforcement.
David Schaefer is the Director of Advocacy at the Latin American Association in Atlanta. The organization says there's an estimated 393,000 undocumented immigrants in Georgia. A majority of them are Latino. Schaefer says while President Obama deported more people than any other president, more than 2.5 million, it's the rhetoric of the current president that really has people worried.
They want to know how to govern themselves, how to think about reality, how to think about their families. And so a lot of them have questions about how do I prepare if something comes along? How do I get my family ready for that kind of event?
Their packed parking lot tells the story of just how many people are worried about being deported. People like Jonathan Ramirez.
Jonathan Ramirez qualifies as a dreamer, though technically he's not. He's still going through that process. What that means is that at any day, at any moment, he can be deported. He took a big risk by being on camera with CNN, but he says it's important to stand up to President Trump. He says if President Trump is doing anything right, it's that he's uniting undocumented immigrants across the country to stand up for a bigger cause. Aaron?
All right. Thank you very much, Nick. And out front now, the Democratic former mayor of Los Angeles, current California gubernatorial candidate Antonio Villaraigosa, and Republican former congressman, former presidential candidate Tom Tancredo. Thanks to both of you. Mayor, let me start with you. You heard Ramirez, eligible to be a dreamer, hasn't registered yet, kind of going through that process, which means he is not protected by the fact Trump isn't deporting dreamers right now. Should Ramirez be afraid?
Absolutely, given what we've seen over the last few weeks, what we've heard over the last year and a half, almost two, from the rhetoric of the president during the campaign, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, why are we doing this? The fact is, and according to the National Academy of Sciences, immigrants commit crimes to a lesser degree than the native-born, 5 times less, by the way, including Mexican immigrants, I may add. We know that they contribute to the economy. I was mayor of Los Angeles. This was not my number one issue. Public safety, education, transportation. But it's the epicenter of the foreign-born and the undocumented. They're starting businesses in Los Angeles, in Colorado, in Georgia, all across the nation. This is creating a terror in these communities. People who have been, women who have been assaulted, as we saw recently, a woman who was deported after she went to testify about an assault occurring in her home against her. She was deported. So women across the country now, if they're undocumented, know they can't come forward to report those kinds of crimes.
So, Congressman, when you hear this and you think about the story that we just saw, and I know, it may seem hard to put this question to you like this, but I think it's fair because it does come down to individuals. You look at Mr. Ramirez's story, that he actually went on television with his face, so that could open him up to deportation tomorrow. I mean, should he be deported?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know his particular circumstance, but from everything you've said, he's probably not in danger of that because he is in that dreamer category.
But he's not a dreamer. But that's the thing. He's not actually a dreamer. So he could be, right?
In fact, yes, he could be. Now, look, I don't care what crime it is that you commit. There are penalties associated, whether it is a small misdemeanor or if it is a very serious one. There are, in fact, ramifications.
So driving without a license in his case twice, does that count?
No. Coming into this country illegally starts the process. Starts that problem. He has to live with this
but he was
forever
7.
until he gets it straightened out. Okay, so he's got how many? He's been here. He's 26 years old.
22.
So he has 22. So he's had however many years to try to get this straightened out. Apparently hasn't done it. And so, yeah, there are ramifications to this. You're asking me to think about some situation in which you can do these things, you can come into the country illegally, but never worry about it. Well, that's not going to happen. At least not until you do something crazy like a massive amnesty, which I think is a horrible idea. And by the way, we have totally different figures for the number of crimes committed by illegal aliens in this country than Mr. Villagrosa, because right here in Colorado, I'll tell you that's much higher for that particular community than the non-immigrant community.
All right. I want to, though, talk about the issue of who should be deported, because I think the individual stories are important, because when you're an ICE agent and you're going in or you're doing a raid, it does come down to these stories. I mean, Mayor, we've been covering the story of a woman in Colorado, right, hiding out in a church to avoid deportation. She has 3 kids born in the U.S. She doesn't want to be separated from them. It's a heart-wrenching story. But we've also covered the story of a woman and her baby who were separated from her husband. He missed all the firsts in his child life. Why? Because they did it right. They played by the rules. They went through the formal immigration process. That meant being separated. Is this fair?
Well, look, we need to fix this broken immigration system, for sure. I think both Democrats and Republicans agree that we need to fix this broken immigration system. Deporting 11 million people is not the answer. No country's ever done that. The notion of mass deportations, of building walls, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for any of us. The cost to our economy, the cost of increasing the ICE by another 10,000 officers. It's already the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. We spend more on border enforcement than we do for the DEA, the ATF, and the FBI combined. We've got to be smart with respect to this issue. Nobody is saying that they haven't broken the law. They have broken the law. Let's fix this broken immigration system, secure our borders, give them a pathway to citizenship, put them at the end of the line, and go on from there.
So, Mayor, you had the first word. I'll give you the last word, Congressman. Could you respond to the mayor's point, though, about already the law enforcement, the largest law enforcement in the nation, we're spending all this money? Is this really the way we want to spend extra money on deporting people like Mr. Ramirez?
Believe me, the immigrant community in this country, primarily because they are, low-wage workers. The fact is that massive immigration of low-skill, low-wage workers into this country does not benefit us economically. It costs us. The amount it costs all of the taxpayers in this country for health care, for immigrants, both legal and illegal for the most part, for incarceration, for education.
Actually, more people
it's far more expensive. No, wait a minute, Mayor, I didn't interrupt you. It is far more expensive for the taxpayers of this country to sustain that illegal immigration than it is to try to stop it. And what is it that is so hard to understand about a country trying to actually establish its rule of law? And if a president comes out and says, we are going to enforce the law. Why is everybody so amazed at that? The fact is it should have been enforced a long time before now. And in terms of wanting to fix this system, oh, buddy, I am absolutely with you 100%. It is certainly broken. Well, and I'm all for fixing it. It's just you and I have a different approach, I think, about how that might happen.
But I'll merely say between law and humanity, there is a 20, 40, 60, 80 years ago.
All right, thank you both.
And that's a fact, according to the National Academy of Sciences.
Thank you
very much.
Mondays on TNT. Enter the provocative world of a young William Shakespeare in TNT's new drama series, Will.
We are at war, and our only weapons are words.
Told with a revolutionary visual style and modern soundtrack, the series celebrates all the love, lust, history, and brilliance of William Shakespeare. TNT's new series, Will, airs Mondays at 9, starting July 10th on TNT and on the TNT app.
And tonight, in our special week-long investigation, our Ed Lavandera is back along the 2,000-mile-long southern border, this time in California, with incredible access to an underground network of drug smuggling tunnels that stretch from Mexico beneath the existing border fence into the United States. Here's Ed Lavandera with the story you'll see only out front.
For years, the vigilance along the U.S. southern border has been growing. Hundreds of miles of fencing, Border Patrol agents crisscrossing the remote terrains and urban streets. Ground sensors and high-powered cameras keep constant watch. But now, smugglers go where the cameras and eyes can't see them.
We are in a tunnel underneath Otay Mesa, California, which is just south of San Diego on the border with Tijuana, Mexico. This is a tunnel that stretched about 760 feet from Tijuana into a warehouse, or would have stretched into a warehouse on the other side of the border. And we're about 70 feet underground right now.
That's one of the deeper tunnels we've ever found in there.
Lance Lenore is part of a specialized team of Border Patrol agents known as the Tunnel Rats. They work underground, navigating newly discovered tunnels and sewer systems.
Do you think that these tunnels started appearing as a response to as more fencing went up in this area?
Oh, I'm sure it probably did. But we're also still talking, there's a lot of stuff they have to move.
Homeland Security officials say in the last 10 years, nearly 30 of these tunnels have been discovered just in the San Diego area alone.
They will continue to go on. Between the U.S. and Mexican border, yes, it will continue. There's a way that these drug trafficking organizations can stay undetected, and it's by tunneling, they will.
This is usually a high dollar, high, risk reward enterprise. It's a lot of stuff that they got to move in a relatively short amount of time.
Lenore says the tunnels are used to move large packs of marijuana and cocaine and are often lined with electrical power and ventilation.
This one had a rail system in it.
How long does it take to build something like this?
Depending on the resiliency of the digging crew, they can go really fast, really far.
Is it by hand, like shovels?
Yeah, it's basically almost exclusively by hand with power tools.
When these things started popping up, what was your reaction to that?
The imagination of people trying to illicitly come north is something I don't try to second guess. I mean, they're incredible, some of the methods they use.
Fighting this ingenuity below ground has fundamentally changed life on the border above ground. Alicia and Chris Martin spend their lives straddling both sides of the border. They own organic farms in Mexico and a produce distribution business, and one of the most unique restaurants in Nogales, Mexico.
The restaurant is called The Rock.
Yes, it is. Yeah, La Roca.
La Roca.
La Roca, yes.
The Rock.
Yes.
Because your uncle built this into the side of this mountain.
That's me.
As a child, Alicia remembers freely crossing the border into Mexico.
This is our farm. We'd come down in our bathing suits as kids. Come down, buy the popsicle, get the ice cream, and go back. It's called the Bar Chico.
But with immigration controls tightening on the U.S. side and the fear of cartel violence, La Roca has struggled to keep its doors open.
It was all of a sudden somebody came in and hit the light switch, and there was nobody. There was nobody in town. There was nobody on the street.
They're difficult problems to solve. Throwing up trade barriers, putting up a wall. There's such harsh approaches to the problems. And once again, you're treating a symptom and you're not going after the root cause of the problem.
Perhaps no place symbolizes the impact of tightened border security quite like this place, Boquillas, Mexico. This is one of the smallest legal border checkpoints you're going to find. This is the Boquillas crossing in Big Bend National Park. Literally 2 little boats and a guy who rows you across. Boquillas is a small town of 200 people. Its lifeline is the tourists that venture across the Rio Grande for the tamales at Jose Falcon's restaurant.
It's very nice to live here. Enchilada verde.
Lilia Falcon runs the restaurant her father opened in 1973. But after 9/11, the United States closed the Boquillas border crossing and the town slowly started dying. Falcon's had to close. The entry point reopened almost 4 years ago, and Falcon's is back. But Lilia Falcon worries about Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration and border security.
If that border crossing goes,
then the town again will be dead again. It would be hard. It would be very hard again. We wouldn't like to go through it again.
It's the chance of taking this rowboat to the other side that just might be the best $5 you'll ever spend.
Ed, you've traveled now the length of the entire southern border, almost 2,000 miles. You've seen the wall that exists. You've seen where it stops. You've seen the mountains. You've seen the rivers. You've seen the tunnels. What has stood out to you the most?
Well, there's little moments like that, like in South Texas, where we saw a stack of ladders that had been abandoned next to one of the border walls, clearly left by migrants who would use these ladders to scale over that wall. There's full of moments like that. But overall, what has really struck me this week in reporting this series is the sense that you get from people that the changes they expect to see here at the dawn of the Donald Trump administration is very similar to the changes that were sparked in the years after 9/11. And there's that sense along from these border communities that the changes will be that dramatic here in the years ahead.
All right. Ed Lavandera, thank you for that incredible series that I think has opened the eyes for so many watching. Out front now, I want to go to the former Arizona Sheriff, Paul Babiou. And thank you very much, Sheriff. I appreciate you taking the time. Ed Lavandera has spent the past month on this special series, traveling across the American-Mexican border. Tonight, you saw the massive tunnels. I know you're very familiar with those. Yes. One of those, where we see Ed right now, 70 feet underground. Okay, so it's 70 feet underground.
Right.
Underneath the existing fence that exists. So do you still think a wall is the right answer? I mean, you can't put a wall 70 feet below the ground, and if you do, then they go down 80, right? I mean, they got ventilation, they got electricity, they got it wired for rail.
Right. Well, I could tell you that largely what we're looking at, there's the illegal immigration issue. There's the drug smuggling issue, which are largely these tunnels are used almost exclusively for. And then there's the larger issue, which I think it wasn't even a part of this conversation, is the national security threat posed by an unsecured border. Look, if we had over 500,000 just basic illegals, people who wanted to come here to the United States for a better life, for a job, for health care, whatever purpose, far more never were apprehended. So it stands to reason that if basic illegals can come in here in that volume, that people that have terrorist intentions with military
Sheriff,
training, deliberate plans could sneak through as well.
I understand your point. And look, this has been raised
Yes.
by Middle Eastern leaders, by others. It's a fair point. But what I'm getting at is whether the wall would stop them or anyone else that wants to come in, right? I mean, there's the tunnels.
Yes, it would.
Okay.
It would. And the reason why I say that, I served as an Army officer commanding up to 1,100 soldiers in Yuma. There, not only when you had 14-foot tall corrugated steel no-climb fence, far more important than the fence is enforcing the law. When there's real consequences behind it, and that's what we haven't had under both Democrats and Republicans. So there's a lot of blame to go around here. What Donald Trump's going to do is enforce the laws that are currently on the books.
Okay, so that's one thing, but isn't that different than the wall, right? I mean, we went through the tunnel issue that are 70 feet underground, so a wall doesn't help with that.
Sure.
He found the stacks of ladders. The wall in many places that Ed went, he measured it. It's 10 to 20 feet high. That's easy to scale. It's easy to use a ladder. head was actually even able to go under the wall, to slither underneath it in a couple places, Sheriff. So, again, I see your point about consequences. I see all your points. But the real question is, does a wall help? Yeah.
It does. In Yuma, that I point out, 94% reduction in illegal entries. That's a secure border. That's what it looks like. And it's because you have physical barrier, but you also need the enforcement. There's 9 sectors of the Border Patrol along the southwest border, and very few were actually enforcing what was called streamline, an actual consequence if you breached that barrier, that wall. You were deported, and there were consequences behind it. Most of the border, there was disparate enforcement. There was full catch and release was happening. And so when there's no consequence and no enforcement, of course, my deputies have arrested people 16, 22 times. They keep returning. And why wouldn't they? Because there's no consequence or punishment. That's what's really been the issue here, far more than a wall, far more than any other issue that people think is going to solve it. It's going to be enforcement of U.S. laws.
All right, Sheriff, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Aaron.
Next, President Trump's border wall. My next guest is the founder of Patron, the tequila, and he'll tell you exactly how much more it will cost you to buy a bottle of Patron if Trump enforces his tax.
Hi, everyone. This is Michaela Pereira. I am hosting a brand new podcast called CNN's The Rewind 90s Edition. It starts on July 6th, and together we'll journey back to the era of VHS movie nights to discover how the 90s still leaves its mark on us today. Find out more at cnn.com/the90s.
Breaking news, a battle of billionaires over the border wall. In a rare press conference today, one of the richest men in the world, the Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim, offering to negotiate with President Trump on Mexico's behalf. Trump's latest threat against Mexico, of course, is a massive tax on imports. Out front now, billionaire businessman John Paul DeJoria. He is the co-founder of Patron Spirits, which is produced in Mexico, like all tequila, and of Paul Mitchell Systems. John Paul, thanks so much for being with me. Our big number tonight, 20%, because that is the number, the tax that President Trump is again threatening to put on imports from Mexico to pay for the wall. You make and then export Patron from Mexico.
Correct.
If the tax comes into effect, what happens?
If it comes into effect, unfortunately, with all due respect, the Mexican government doesn't pay for it. The U.S. consumer does. If the tax comes across, we have to raise our prices. We can't make the tequila in the United States. Our quality tequila has to be made down in Mexico by law. Can't make it here. So it's passed on to our distributors, onto the retailer, which will pass on the consumer. So if that happens, will people stop buying Patron? Probably not, because people want to treat themselves to the quality of a Patron. But will it affect the Mexican government? I think it's going to affect the United States citizen more than the U.S. government. I really, really do, or the Mexican government.
And you're saying what? For Patron, just in your individual case, it's what, a few dollars a bottle more with just that tax?
It'll be a few dollars. Yeah, it'll be a few dollars a bottle more with the tax, but the consumer of the United States is going to be paying for it, not the Mexican government. So I think we have to really take a different look at that.
So when you talk about that, okay, if this tax, that's what it means for Patron. We also buy from Mexico auto parts, cars, trucks, and a lot of oil. It's the 4th biggest supplier of oil to the United States.
Yep.
Trump was actually asked about the point you're making, John Paul. He said the tax, whether it would just be passed along to consumers here in America. And I want to play for you his answer. Get your reaction. Here he is.
Sure.
Well, I think some of it may get passed along, but it also creates jobs. So I'm not against something like that. But with respect to Mexico, something else could happen, which would be much more positive for both Mexico and the United States.
So he said there, John Paul, I think some of it may get passed along, but it also creates jobs. Fair?
Well, you got to really, not quite. We got to really think this one out a little bit, because oil, for example, and food is a commodity. If you raise the price by 20% because of whatever taxation there is, the consumer at the other end is going to pay for it. They're going to pay for it across the line. So I think they may want to think that one out a little bit. You're going to be paying more for vegetables. You're going to be paying more for gas and oil that comes from Mexico. And if such a large percentage that we use comes from Mexico, it only makes sense that the oil and gas companies have to charge more money. So the U.S. consumer is going to pay for it. And, you know, Mr. Trump is a smart fellow, and I think Mr. Trump wants to do what's right. But I do think that they have to think this out a little bit more. Now, when it comes to renegotiating maybe a trade pact, that's different. I know when I ship into Mexico for Paul Mitchell hair care products, we have a duty of 16%. So we have to charge a little bit more money to the Mexican people. They pay it because of the quality of the product. So going both ways, it definitely affects one another. It does. But I know that going down there, we can charge 16% going down.
Which I think is actually a really important point, because people may conflate the wall with NAFTA itself. And you have a lot of issues with what he's proposed. But right now you're saying, as part of NAFTA, when they sell here, there's no tariff, right? That's why he's talking about putting one on. But when you go down there, you're paying right now 16% tariff to go into Mexico.
That is correct.
And that's part of NAFTA.
That is correct. Yep, that's correct. There's no question about it. But going back to Mexico paying for the wall, the way it's stated right now, and I'm sure they're going to review this and change it a little bit, the U.S. consumer pays for it, not Mexico. But I think they're going to look at it maybe a little more seriously and figure out what may really work and what may not work. And I don't think that one across the line at 20% tax is going to be advantageous to our people or jobs. It's not going to affect jobs, as far as I know, one bit, unless he only charged people that were U.S. manufacturers that have a facility down there to ship it right back to the United States. Maybe that's different. I don't know. Maybe it'll equalize what money they're saving so that they'll hire more people in this nation. I don't know. But when it comes to things like products that are made in Mexico that can't be made anywhere else, or commodities like oil and food and things of that nature, it's American citizens that pay for it. They may want to rethink that one out just a little bit.
All right. John Paul DeJoria, thank you very much for all of that information. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Now you can stream critically acclaimed films and cult favorites from the world's greatest film libraries with Filmstruck. Now available on Roku, Filmstruck is the streaming service for fans of great cinema and is the exclusive streaming home for the Criterion Collection. Filmstruck brings you a wealth of independent and foreign titles updated weekly, along with original bonus material and expert commentary. And did I mention it's now available on Roku? Start your free 14-day trial today at filmstruck.com.
Tonight, a dire warning about North Korea. Kim Jong-un is practicing for war. A nuclear expert writing in Foreign Policy magazine that recent missile launches are not tests. Quote, North Korea knows the missiles work. What the military units are doing now is practicing for a nuclear war. And he's not alone in sounding the alarm. Kyung La is out front.
What we're talking about is no less than the end of civilization.
The end, and it could happen in a flash with a nuclear bomb, warns former U.S. Defense Secretary William Perry. North Korea's recent missile tests and aggressive flexing of its growing nuclear power sounds an alarm. Combined with today's political climate, Perry says, means a ratcheting up of the world's nuclear threat level.
The possibility of some kind of a nuclear catastrophe is probably greater than it has ever been. Greater than any time during the Cold War.
Perry served under President Bill Clinton, but traces his nuclear knowledge back to the Cuban Missile Crisis as a CIA analyst during the Kennedy administration, when America edged frighteningly close to a nuclear war with Russia. That was the height of the Cold War, when school children rehearsed for a nuclear attack. Today, an aggressive Russia is once again touting its nuclear capability, while North Korea tests the new president, a brash, first-time politician, the administration promising a strengthening of its nuclear arsenal.
The United States will not yield its supremacy in this area to anybody. Our goal is to make sure that we maintain America's dominance around the world.
What is the North Korea piece of this?
The danger is not that North Korea would deliberately and consciously plan an attack with their weapons, but they would blunder into some kind of a conflict.
Is it real? How real is this?
Well, first of all, the nuclear weapons are very real, and there are almost 15,000 in the world today, more than enough to destroy the entire planet.
If the president gave the order, we had to launch the missiles.
It's a concern being echoed by Bruce Blair, former nuclear missile launch officer who recorded this anti-Trump ad for the Clinton campaign. Blair says he's speaking not as a partisan, but as a scholar. His concern, not just Kim Jong-un, but President Trump.
This person is erratic, impulsive, aggressive, ill-informed. He is the sole authority who can decide whether or not to launch thousands of nuclear weapons in minutes with a single phone call. I just don't have confidence in his judgment. I live in fear that he would make a bad call and that call could be civilization ending
Trump supporters like former Navy SEAL Carl Higbee say despite his fiery rhetoric, the president understands the power of the office.
Launching a nuclear weapon is far different from launching a tweet. The world is a safer place when America is on top, when America is in power. The world is a safer place if our enemies believe that there is a chance that we may use nuclear power.
Now, President Trump did tell Reuters last month in an interview that he does dream of a world where nuclear weapons simply do not exist. But as long as they do exist, he wants the United States to be, quote, at the top of the pack. Well, his critics, Aaron, counter that simply does not make the world any safer. Aaron?
All right. Thank you very much, Kelly. Hillary Clinton taking on President Trump tonight. Speaking at the Tina Brown Women of the World Summit, the former Secretary of State confessed that she enjoyed watching the president struggle and fail at repealing and replacing Obamacare.
Having listened to them talk about, repeal and replace for 8 years or 7 years now, and they had not a clue what that meant. Health care is complicated, right? And so they're like, they don't know what to do. And yeah, I do admit that was somewhat gratifying.
And out front now, Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida. Congresswoman, great to have you with me. A rare public appearance today by Hillary Clinton because we really haven't seen much of her since the election. Do you want her to be more vocal, even more vocal, in opposing Donald Trump?
I think she needs to be measured and be vocal when it's the most relevant and appropriate and can really, I think, draw the most significant contrast.
Now, Senator Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, of course, has been much more vocal, leading protests, holding town halls. He's got a Facebook Live show now, Congresswoman, called The Bernie Sanders Show. It's a hit. Some of his videos getting as many as 8 million views. Is Senator Bernie Sanders the leader of your party right now?
Senator Sanders is a leader of our party, one of a number of leaders, and it is absolutely fantastic that he is leading an effort to continue to engage our grassroots activists. So anything that we can do, and we are all hands on deck here to make sure that we don't miss the moment. And so whether it's Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or Nancy Pelosi or Debbie Wasserman Schultz or any one of a number of us who want to make sure that we can help our constituents and our supporters answer the question that we're all getting, Erin. What can I do to help?
So you mentioned the word grassroots, and you and Senator Sanders have had a disagreement over the direction of your party.
I think it's time to take a reassessment of the purpose of where the Democratic Party is and where it wants to go. And I think essentially what we need to do right now is to become a grassroots party.
Respectfully to Senator Sanders, we are already a grassroots party.
Do you think you need to be working together right now? What's the issue here?
Oh, we are working together. I mean, Senator Sanders is a member of the Senate Democratic leadership. As you said, he has a Facebook Live show that gets 8 million views. He's been, fully integrated, and his team has been fully integrated into the work that the Democrats are doing to fight back against the Trump administration. So, as much as we can make sure that we reach out to the grassroots, as we always have, then
and it sounds like that's your issue. When he's saying we need to become a grassroots party, you're obviously somewhat offended by the way that he's saying that.
I'm not at all offended. This is a manufactured battle. I spend no time worrying about the semantics of whether Bernie Sanders thinks we are or aren't a grassroots party.
We began this conversation talking about women, and President Trump's daughter, top advisor Ivanka, recently talked about her official role at the White House. Here's what she said.
I think for me, what it means is that I'll continue the advocacy work that I was doing in the private sector, advocating for the economic empowerment of women.
Now, Congresswoman, we know Ivanka Trump now has met with the Planned Parenthood president, Cecile Richards, but we understand that meeting did nothing to change Cecile Richards' view of President Trump or of Ivanka Trump. Do you think Ivanka Trump is working to help women or not right now?
I think Ivanka Trump needs to recognize that she is now the most powerful woman in this administration. She has a portfolio, an official portfolio, an official role in the White House, in the West Wing, which includes making sure that women are a priority of this administration. And she owns that portfolio, and she no longer has the luxury of sort of dropping in and dropping out when you own a portfolio like that. And so it is her responsibility, having that portfolio, to really lay out what the administration's agenda is and stand up for it.
When she says she's fighting for women, she's going to be attending this conference in Europe this spring. When she says she's working on behalf of women, do you see any evidence of that at this point?
I would say that because of her complicity with her father's agenda, she's fighting women, not fighting for women.
On the topic of women, the president defended Bill O'Reilly against sexual harassment allegations. I'm sure you saw this. He said he did nothing wrong. He said Bill O'Reilly's a good man. Were you surprised that he came to O'Reilly's defense so specifically?
Oh, God, nothing surprises me with this man anymore. I mean, look at the tape that, the Access Hollywood tape that came out during the campaign. I'm not surprised because this is a man who is in the White House that is engaged in that kind of conduct. So naturally, he would be dismissing the very similar conduct from someone else.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much, Congresswoman.
Thanks, Erin.
Hey, before you go, we wanted to let you know that we just launched the ability for anyone to advertise on CNN Podcasts. You're just a few clicks away from reaching millions of people in a way that you never have before. Advertise for a business, event, or kick off an awareness campaign for your brand. Start today at purewinning.com/CNN. Integrating podcasts into your marketing mix has never been easier. We'll even tell you how to save 15% on your CNN campaigns for the rest of 2017. Go to purewinning.com/CNN to get started.